So I've been testing out a lot of MIDI pad controllers over the past couple of years. You might be able to see a couple of them here behind me. I've been testing those out, reviewing them, recommending some of them with the specific purpose of using those pad controllers for finger drumming, which means that we need to have reliable, responsive pads that trigger to really soft touches and stuff like that. That's what we need as finger drummers, and I felt right now 2021 is a nice moment for a little recap of what I learned over the past couple of years. Maybe help you decide what is the best pad controller to buy at this time. So I'm going to start out with the pad controller that I'm most likely to recommend to most people, and then I'm going to move into the more obscure or exceptional stuff. So feel free to use the time links that I provide with this video to move to the sections that are interesting to you, because there's going to be a lot of talking. Also, make sure to check the description and the comments below for the latest updates, as well as my blog post that I'll link to, where I always keep my gear recommendations up to date before you make any purchases, because you know, things change and you want to be informed. My number one recommendation right now, February 2021, that is this controller, the Maschine Micro Mark III. And let me tell you why. It's basically value for money. You get a bunch of great sensitive pads that respond to the lightest of touches for a fair price of $250. If you spend less money than that for a cheaper pad controller, you're going to notice a pretty big difference in quality of the pads. So the pads of the cheaper controllers do not respond as well as the Maschine Micros. If you're going to pay more money, so you're going to go up to $350, $500, right, for a more expensive controller, the difference in sensitivity of the pads is basically negligible. There is a difference. I can go into small details, and I might do that later on in this video, but take it from me, for most people, the increase in sensitivity or dynamic range of the pads that comes with the extra $100, the extra $200 that you might spend after the Maschine Micro is not going to be worth it. The device actually got quite a lot of nice upgrades after its initial release, because when it was initially released, for example, you could not set it into MIDI mode, you could not edit the sensitivity or the velocity curve in controller editor, you could not edit the notes of the pads, and all of that stuff is fixed now. You can do all of those things on your computer, and you can basically tweak this thing just as much as you can tweak your big machine in MIDI mode, and therefore it comes really, really close. And one more cool thing about the Maschine Micro Mark III at this point, for all the rights to repair fans out there, I did a video a couple of months ago about repairing my big Maschine Mark III, and that actually led to the discovery that MPCstuff.com now sells pad sensor sheets for the big Maschine Mark III and the Micro Mark III, because those are the same pad sensor sheets. And that means that if your pads deteriorate after hitting them like a million times or something, you can actually open up your device, put in a new pad sensor sheet from MPCstuff, and if everything goes according to plan, your pads are going to feel as good as new. So that is another slight plus for the Maschine crowd out there. What are the exceptions? What are the things to keep in mind? First of all, if you're not a Windows or Mac user, but you use a Linux or something, then I would be very careful with Maschine Micro, because it's not class compliant. It relies on drivers and some software to install. You can bypass the Maschine software, but you do need to have it installed initially on your system in order for everything to work. And it just works on Mac and Windows. Maybe you can run it on Linux, but I'm not sure. And then another thing, if you want to use this thing without a computer at all, that's also probably not going to work. So you cannot use it to trigger a hardware synth or something if you don't have your laptop with you. The device doesn't seem to turn on if it's not plugged into a computer with an active operating system, an active Windows or Mac operating system. So yeah, it's still my main recommendation for most people, because I think most people use a Mac or a Windows computer and they're planning on using their controller just to play some drums, right? That's what finger drumming is all about. So for all of you, this is definitely going to be your best bet at this time. But for some of you, it might not be. And for that, we're going to move on to my next recommendation. So second place, silver medal. What I would do if you somehow cannot use the Maschine Micro, again, don't want to buy the Maschine Micro, I would go up in price. So I would go towards the $350 range. Over there we have the Nektar Aura as a nice 4x4 controller. I did a huge video about the Nektar Aura that you can check out over here. It doesn't work that well right out of the box, but you can tweak the pads to an extreme degree and make it respond the way you want it to respond. I must say, it's a lot more of a hassle to set up than the Maschine Micro, but for all of you who want a nice mid-tier, fair-priced controller that has nice responsive pads, I would say your only other option in that price range is probably the Nektar Aura. Moving on to the Launchpad Pro Mark III, which in my opinion has a shared second place with the Nektar Aura as a controller that I recommend. In order to justify a purchase of the Launchpad Pro Mark III, you do have to have a reason to buy an 8x8 controller. That's basically my recommendation for most people who want to decide between getting a 4x4 or an 8x8 controller. It's just, do you have a plan for it? Do you have a reason why you want to get an 8x8? Is it that you just want more pads and you don't really know why? Then that's not a valid reason. Do you want to control Ableton with it? Do you want to trigger samples with it? Do you want to play chords or melodies with it? Those are good reasons. So if you have a plan, be my guest, go towards an 8x8 and accept that the pads are smaller and stuff like that. You can definitely make it work. I did a video about setting up a nice finger drumming layout on an 8x8 controller over here, and I personally do enjoy playing those types of things, but I can tell you, you really do not need it for just drumming. In practice, when I'm recording a song or something, I always revert back to my 4x4 because it's more than enough. 4x4 is more than enough, and I prefer to get more variation, more expressiveness out of actually improving my timing, improving my dynamics, improving the control that I have over my hands, as opposed to having more sounds at my fingertips. I just found that it's never needed. So just keep that in mind. Just for drumming, 4x4 is enough. If you have some other plans, some other artistic plans, an 8x8 might be a great buy, because the Launchpad Pro Mark III has great pads. They respond really nice. It recently got a nice firmware update where you can actually set the trigger threshold of the Launchpad Pro. So you can set it to be super sensitive. You can set the curve, so the response curve, in order to make it fit your playing style. And it's just an overall very, very quality type of device that I can highly recommend. Now, some of you might be saying, hey Rob, but what about the Launchpad X, right? It's a $200 device, $50 cheaper than the Maschine Micro Mark III. Why aren't you giving that one a gold medal or a silver medal? Well, for that I have to take a step back and talk a little bit about something that I've learned over the past couple of years, which is that even though you have two devices that have the same name, same brand, they might not be exactly the same. I did a video about that a year ago called Every Launchpad is a Special Snowflake. And in that video, I compared 3 Launchpad X's with one another. And they were actually a little bit different. One of them was a little bit less sensitive. One of them had a little bit more double note triggering. And I also compared 2 Launchpad Pros who were significantly better, but also had some small deviations in between the devices. And that is just something that I learned over time, is that, yeah, if you recommend something, you might run into this problem where you test out a device, you say the pads are great, they respond really well, and then somebody buys this thing based on your recommendation and gets a crappy version of the thing that you recommend, and then they get angry at me, start saying that in the comments. And I sort of tried to take all of that into account when making this recommendation. So I've been looking at comments, I've been keeping score of how many people complained, for example, about the Launchpad X, how many people complained about their Akai MPD 218s. Spoiler alert, a lot of people. How many people complained about their Maschine Micro Mark III, their big machine, stuff like that, their Launchpad Pro Mark III. And on top of that, I bought multiple devices, as much as I could. So I actually own 2 Maschine Micros. I played 3 in total, and one of them I returned, not because it was crappy, but just because I didn't need it anymore. And then I still have 2 of them left, bought 1 year apart, and both those Maschine Micros respond just as well. They're similar, they're great. So that already, strengthens my faith in a device like that. On top of that, on the message boards, a lot of people bought the Maschine Micro Mark III based on my recommendation, and I didn't get that many complaints. There were some issues where somebody had to return their Maschine Micro because a pad got stuck or something, but you know, that happens with everything. You can buy a washing machine and it doesn't work. You can buy a car and it doesn't work. As long as it's not this weird 50-50 type of thing where one person says it's great and then the other person says no it's not, and then it's great, no it sucks. And if something like that happens, that's something that happened, for example, with Akai MPD 218, but it also happened a little bit with the Launchpad X, where the crowd is so divided. That's sort of when the alarm bells start to go off in my head. So is that an airtight scientific way to get to the truth? No, I'm aware of that. It's not completely airtight. It's a little bit of a ballpark here, but I'm doing my best, right? I'm trying to get as close to the truth as possible, and I'm going to try to make as many people happy as possible. And about the Launchpad X, does it mean all this that you shouldn't buy a Launchpad X? Well, I don't know, because I played a lot of good Launchpad X's. I played 3 Launchpad X's that I thought were great. I just know that there are Launchpad X's out there that are not up to snuff. I don't know how many. I haven't tested them all, but if you order your device on Amazon, you want to try it out, spend the $200, order it, test it out. If it responds great and you're happy with it, great. If you notice that it's crappy, you're going to remember me saying this. You're going to be like, maybe I got a bad version of this machine. Return it, get your money back, try something else. Maybe even try another Launchpad X. I don't care, right? Just know that this is what's going on, and know that my ranking is based on a little bit on how many complaints I got or how much chance I think there is that you're going to get a crappy device. And it's a ballpark. I'm aware of that. Okay, so number 1, Maschine Micro Mark III. Number 2, silver medal, Nektar Aura Launchpad Pro Mark III. And then the bronze sort of league, maybe 3rd place, I would put the Launchpad X there, because it's still $200 is not that much for what you get. And I've had some really great devices. Now let's move from the mid-tier devices back down towards the budget devices, because I'm aware that $200, $250, $350 even is a lot of money for a lot of people, right? So some of you might just not be able to spend that amount right now, and I want to give you the best possible advice I can give you on a budget controller, what budget controller to buy. And let's start out with the Presonus Atom, $150, so $100 cheaper than the Maschine Micro Mark III, and I still think it's a solid choice for those who don't want to spend that much on a pad controller, right? It's significantly less responsive than the Maschine Micro Mark III. That's why, you know, it's not my number 1 recommendation. But the pads are solid. I tested out 3 of them, I think, throughout the years. Yeah, 3 Presonus Atoms bought like a year apart. I've not heard that many complaints from people who bought the Atom. I did hear stories where people bought the Atom, thought it was good for the money, and then later upgraded to, for example, the Maschine Micro Mark III, and then basically the consensus was that the Maschine Micro Mark III was a significant upgrade, right? $100 well spent for better pads. On top of that, it's hard to change, or impossible even, to change the notes, the MIDI notes that the pads send out on the Atom. You cannot go in to some sort of controller editor and edit the notes, which also might be shitty for people who want to control hardware synths or something with it. But that doesn't mean that the Atom is crap or something for what you get. $150 is a fair price. The pads respond a little bit better if you hit them on the side, on the edges. So the center of the pads of the Atom is less sensitive than the side. That's something we as a community figured out over time. But yeah, with all that in mind, and with my experiences, users' experiences, I think it's still a pretty solid choice. And then we can go even lower in price towards the $100 range, which brings me to the infamous Akai MPD 218. I did a new video about that recently, actually, where I opened up an Akai MPD 218 to see if I could fix the pad sensitivity by applying some electrical tape on the inside. Well, that worked in my case. I managed to fix the controller, make it a lot more sensitive. I also actually bought 2 new Akai MPD 218s over there that I wanted to use for that video, because I figured like the chance that I'm going to get 2 great Akai MPD 218s is very small based on previous experiences, because like 2 years ago I had to buy 5 Akai MPD 218s to get 1 good one. So I figured I was going to buy 2. One of them is probably going to be crappy, and then I can test out if I can fix it, right, with the tape hack. Turns out that both of them were great. These were just really solid devices, and that reminded me of how awesome it is if you get a good Akai MPD218, right? If you pay the $100 and you get a device like one of the two that I got here behind me, man, that's awesome. $100 and you just have a great playable dynamic device. It's nice you can change the notes of the pads in contrast to the Presonus Atom. You can configure it the way you want. It looks nice, it looks compact. It's a great device as long as it's working. And that's still the problem of course with the MPD218. Underneath the video where I fixed it, I got a lot of responses from people who said, yeah, I did the same thing and now I'm so happy with my device. But there were some other people who said like, yeah, I tried the same thing, but it turned into this whole whack-a-mole endeavor where I would fix two pads, make them more sensitive, and then a third pad would start to have a lot of ghost triggering. Then I would fix that part, and then another pad would get less sensitive. And I would just be playing this whack-a-mole thing all the time until I gave up because it wasn't fixable. And other people were even saying like, yeah, I ordered my MPD218, but I had to hit the pad so hard that it was just impossible to use, and I had to send it back. And there's a lot of division basically over this thing. I think the quality can vary quite a lot, or people's experiences can vary quite a lot. I'm not 100% sure. I know that I've played quite a lot of crappy MPD218s. I now have two of them that are pretty good. I have one of them that was a little older that wasn't that great that I actually managed to fix with the tape hack. So yeah, you know, if you have only $100 and you know that you can order an Akai MPD218 and get your money back if it's too crappy, right? Then this might be worth a shot, because the combination of that there's just a chance that you get a good one, plus you might be able to open it up and fix it with the tape hack. Technically, you're avoiding your warranty if you do that, probably, but you know, as you say, you're avoiding your warranty if somebody figures out that you opened it up, if you know what I mean, right? So yeah, all that in mind, watch that video where I fixed the Akai MPD218. It might be worth a try. Just know that if this doesn't work out for you, or you're ending up with a controller that you're not happy with, just know that you're not the only one. It's a bit of a gamble, and it will be for a long time. Even if Akai starts churning out perfect controllers from now on, there's still this stock of MPD218s somewhere in a warehouse, you know, of Amazon, for example, and you don't know which device you're going to get if you order one today. I think if you have no chance of returning the device or getting your money back, this is a risky bet. I think it's riskier than Bitcoin. No, it's not riskier than Bitcoin, but it's pretty risky, right? So keep that in mind. Akai MPD218, $99, risky, but you might end up with something cool if you're lucky and you're good with a screwdriver, okay? Now, other cheaper devices. Some of you might be interested in getting an all-in-one. So one of the devices that I tested recently or a year ago was the Novation Launchkey Mini Mark III. That's the only piano/pad thing that I really enjoy playing so far. But, you know, it is worth thinking about, because I think that thing costs around $100. You have some keys, you have a couple of small pads, basically Launchpad X type pads, 2 rows, so you don't have a full-fledged 4x4 controller, which means that if you're serious about finger drumming, you want to learn with questforgroove.com lessons or something, then no, that's not going to cut it. Then, you know, you do have to buy a Presonus Atom or something like that, right? But if you just want to tap out some beats, sometimes, rarely, and you just want to start making music and you need a keyboard and a pad controller and you don't have money to buy both, then yeah, the Launchkey Mini Mark III is the one device that I can vouch for a little bit, because I tested it out myself and I actually did enjoy playing it. So those are, I think, the best budget options available right now. Now, I am fully aware that there are even cheaper devices out there, right? Small little $20 devices, and I tested some of them out a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, and I was completely underwhelmed by them. I haven't really had an opportunity, or actually, honestly, the enthusiasm to go and look into a bunch of like super cheap devices, because I think the chances are pretty high that there's not going to be anything out there. Like, I think the bottom line lies with the Akai MPD218 actually for the $99, and then, you know, still gamble what you're going to get. But I think that's sort of the bottom budget line that you should be thinking about, and not try and go even lower. except if you're willing to buy stuff secondhand, right? Because that's another budget option. If you manage to buy a Maschine Micro Mark III secondhand and maybe buy some of those pad sensor sheets from MPCstuff.com, you might be able to get yourself a really nice, really good quality pad controller for maybe 150 bucks or something if you buy it from somebody who's not ripping you off. One thing that you have to keep in mind when you buy secondhand Maschine devices is that you always have to get the software with it. So if somebody is just selling you the device and not selling you the software, don't do it because you're going to have problems setting up the device. Keep that in mind, even if you're using it in MIDI mode. But secondhand options, that might be a good idea. Secondhand Maschine Micros, secondhand Launchpad Pro Mark III, maybe for somebody who actually doesn't want an 8x8 because they didn't think about what they wanted, right? And they're switching to 4x4. That might be your opportunity to get a nice bargain. Now, with the budget devices behind us, and before we're moving on to the premium tier expensive devices, I want to introduce one more category I want to talk about, which is like the disruptive new technology type of stuff. For example, the Linnstrument I have there behind me, that little board over there, or the Sensel Morph, the yellow thing in the back with swappable overlays, sort of a sensor system, so not a traditional pad sensor sheet, but some sort of a thing that calculates the position of your finger with some sort of scanning thing. I don't know how it works, but those newer devices, as well as, for example, iPads, mobile phones, mobile drumming, leaving your computer behind, right? Stuff like that. I have a couple of things to say about that. What I noticed about stuff like the Linnstrument, for example, that I really like for playing piano on, or long, nice pads, horn section, stuff like that. I really enjoy those devices. Same Sensel Morph. They seem to not be 100% suitable right now for drumming, for percussive stuff. They have to calculate what the velocity is of your fingers hitting the pads, and then also where you're hitting them. And as soon as you create 3 pressure points at the same time, those things sort of get a little bit confused. Like the velocity seems to be inconsistent. You're not always getting back what you put in, and that sort of throws me off. It only happens with percussive stuff, only with drumming. All the other stuff it's great for, and for some simple beats, they're also fine. So if you're thinking about, for example, getting a Sensel Morph because it has everything, and you're not planning on becoming a super virtuoso finger drummer, it might be enough for you, but keep that in mind. They don't seem to have that same accurate, consistent accuracy of, for example, a Maschine Micro Mark III. They also have to deal with a little bit more latency in my experience. And if you're drumming on an iPad, for example, drumming on a touchscreen, you're even dealing with more latency. And obviously latency, delay, it all affects your timing as a drummer. So yeah, I'm not against any of those new innovations. I like them for a lot of things. I don't think you're getting the best you can possibly get at this point when you're jumping ship towards the new disruptive technologies. I think right now you're getting the best value for money, the best quality, the most options. You're sitting at the grown-up table completely, if you stick with a laptop and a traditional pad controller at this point. And I think it's going to change. I did a video about the future of finger drumming and where the M1 chips are going to take us. I think the future looks bright, and I can't wait for the day when I can drum on my phone, or where I have a mobile setup without a computer. I don't think it's 100% there yet, and I might make more videos about that. I'm going to leave it at that because we're going to move on to the expensive pad controller section. So I'm talking Maschine Plus, right? Akai MPC Live 2. Or for example, the normal Maschine Mark III, right? The big one, the $500 one. Why would you spend all that money on one of those devices, right? The answer to that question is basically you have to have another reason besides just getting good pads. You have to have a reason for buying what they offer you. I think that Akai or Native Instruments is not spending any more money on getting better pads in those devices than the mid-tier pads that I already recommended. They're spending most of their money on putting in an SSD, right? Putting in RAM, putting in a processor for the standalone stuff, or in the case of the non-standalone Maschine Mark III, they're putting in those 2 screens to optimize your workflow when you're making beats. So at this point, if you're buying a big Maschine Mark III, you better use those two screens, right? You better use some of the Maschine workflow that it offers, because if you just buy it for the pads, I think at this point, 2021, it's no longer worth it. I know that in the past I said that there was still a difference and it might be worth it for some people in terms of pad sensitivity, but I really noticed that over time, I don't know, maybe it was firmware upgrades or something, I noticed that to me, the difference between playing a Maschine Micro or a big machine, I can get anything I want to play out of both. There is a small difference in terms of the softest MIDI note that it sends to the computer. If anybody cares, like the Maschine Micro seems to send MIDI notes of about 20 velocity as the softest notes, and the big Maschine Mark III seems to be sending softer notes like velocity 2, velocity 5 to the computer if I hit the pads really softly. But the weird thing is both pads respond to soft touches, so that's not an issue. It's not a triggering issue. It's just what the velocity is that they send out. And it's a little bit different. Some of people might actually prefer how the micro responds. If you're playing ghost notes, you probably prefer them in many cases to be around velocity 20 and not to be velocity 2, because if they're velocity 2, you won't hear them, right? So it's a personal thing. I would really, from now on, focus on the mid-tier devices. The pads are great if that's all you care about. And then if you want standalone functionality in those groove boxes, and keep in mind, standalone functionality doesn't mean a drum kit in a box, right? It just means you have a standalone beat-making device with more sample-based, more hip-hop-based, EDM-based types of sounds. And it's not going to sound like a real drum kit, like Addictive Drums or Superior Drummer sound. So if that's what you want, you have to stick with your laptop anyways. If you want to go outside that realm, if you like the beat making realm, if you're more in that type of stuff, and you also like standalone, for example, or you can use the two screens, as I said before, that's the moment when you're dishing out the extra money. I hope this video was helpful. Here's another one you might like. I'll be back soon with some more information, lessons, I don't know, anything related to finger drumming, controllerism, and the future of music making in your home studio. I hope you enjoyed all of this, and see you soon. Bye-bye.